The Burning Ash by Richard Kish. Prologue. Treasured Memories. A single cherry blossom fluttered in the breeze beneath the great pale moon, dancing through the air as its siblings began to join it, drawing closer before moving off on a different path. It came to a rest on the courtyard ground, where a huge crowd waited excitedly for the beginning of the Dragon's Festival. Every year the people of the kingdom gathered beneath the great sakura tree to celebrate the founding of Ryoshima. All eyes were glued to the palace doors as they awaited the arrival of their beloved queen. The distant clock tower struck midnight, and the great doors opened, revealing a solitary figure who stepped out into the moonlight, tightly gripping her staff. She moved towards the spiralling stairs and began to ascend, drawing a sparkling trail behind her, while her sapphire dress glittered in the starlight, seeming to reflect the night sky. She reached the balcony above and gently positioned herself at the railing. A dragon was emblazoned on the dress and wove its way up her body, glistening with a multitude of colours. Her long brown hair cascaded down her back in flowing curls. 3 covered braids held together by 2 tanzanite chopsticks in a small bun at the back of her head swung gently behind her, and her crystal crown glowed as she looked out at her people. She tried to smile at them as her retinue made their way up to join her. With a firm tap of her staff, an iridescent blue flame sprang up in front of her. It split in 2, circling both ways around the balcony before climbing up the walls of the palace to reach a giant ornate mirror. When the flames made contact, the mirror burst into life. A gently shifting image appeared on its face, a dancing figure manipulating the flames around her before she was consumed. A small light flickered before sprouting, growing, and blooming into a mighty tree. From the tree sprang an egg, which hatched into 2 fiery dragons, which grew and began to fight. In the end, they paused, glimmered, and then the flames died out, leaving a halo of light around the mirror. The woman took a deep breath, looking at her retinue for support. Then she began her speech. Christeos Mos, people of Ryoshima, today marks the anniversary of the founding of our kingdom. A rapturous applause broke out amongst the crowd. From the very beginning, we have held true to our tenets of family and trust. We have fought and struggled to get to where we are today, and the bonds between us will not be broken. More applause erupted, but the queen shifted uncomfortably on her heels. As your queen, it is my duty to serve you, and I hope that I have done you all proud. I love every single one of you. You have inspired me all my life, and I sincerely wish to repay that kindness. Together, we are a family. We stand firm against the world like the great sakura tree, and we never forget where we have come from. This was received with a hearty cheer. The past few years have been difficult. We lost my father and mother last year, and we've lost so many other good people. Her hands shook as she tried to reach the end of her speech. She looked back at her retinue to seek support again before taking a deep breath. We've lost so many good people, but we have persevered, and we are stronger now than ever before. We will never forget their sacrifice. I ask that you all join me in a moment of silence to honour those who gave their lives to protect Ryoshima. The crowd dipped their heads, and silence swept through the courtyard. Some thought about their husbands, some their wives, some their fathers and mothers, some their grandparents and children. The queen closed her eyes in an attempt to hide her tears. Every year it was the same thing, the pomp of the ceremony, leading to a short speech, and then that silence. It broke her heart every single time, because she knew that there was one person nobody remembered at all. As the years passed, it became more and more difficult to bear. With a deep breath, she opened her eyes and looked out at the crowd in front of her. Thousands of people stood beneath, bowing their heads in respect to the departed, as the wind whipped the cherry blossoms from the tree, scattering them at their feet. As the moment of silence drew to a close, something within the queen snapped. The tears she'd been holding back fell. She couldn't keep quiet any longer. At this point in the ceremony, I should thank you all for everything you do, and we should begin the Dragon's Festival Ball. But I can't. Gasps and murmurings spread through the people. One of the retinue stepped forward to the queen. Rosalina, what do you mean? It was the question on everyone's lips. The festival never changed. It went as planned every year, and the people enjoyed themselves. They waited with bated breath for her response. Before the festival continues, I would like to tell you all a story. My story. There was a wave of confusion as thoughts swung from scandal to unknown tragedies, but the Queen continued in spite of the crowd's noise. My grandmother always used to say that life and love was just like that of a cherry blossom. As the petals fall, you never truly know where they're going to end up. They collide with many other petals on their journey, but the unpredictable nature of life means they often must part. What's important is that no matter what happens, it's always beautiful. Ultimately, the only way to stop those we love fading from our lives once they are gone is to remember them, to never leave them behind. That's what I've been doing these past 5 years, remembering. I've been holding tightly on to those treasured memories so I don't lose him again. It's taken me so long to come to terms with it all, but now I need to move on for all of you. Now that I am your queen, I need to be there and be strong so we can move forward together. The only way I can do that is to tell you all the story of how I lost him forever. Him? Who's this him? What is she saying? She's never mentioned anything about a man before. She could hear the crowd muttering to each other, their eyes boring into her, judging her. Her mournful eyes darted to the sky. Are you out there, watching over me? She thought, searching for a sign of hope in the darkness. No. He was gone forever, and she knew it. She always had. Her retinue tried to stop her from continuing, but with a firm tap of her staff on the ground, they withdrew. Nothing was going to stop her anymore. 5 years ago, Ryoshima was changed forever. You all remember that. In the past, our fate and future as a kingdom was decided by the battles of our then gods, the almighty dragons, Fai and Yami. The war between the two dragons raged for centuries, with the two fighting in our present every year at this very festival after the conclusion of the tournament. If Fai won, we were blessed with prosperity, crops flourished, trade was bountiful, and everyone was happy. If Yami won, we suffered great torment. Natural disasters swept the land, our crops would fail, and many people would die. Every year we celebrated the founding of the kingdom, but we always feared for our future. On that night, 5 years ago, that cycle ended, and we were saved. You all know that, but you've forgotten something important. The person who stood up for us and saved us. There was uproar from the people as they protested, remembering that night perfectly, but then upon trying to replay it in their heads, they realised something was missing. A haze fogged their minds the moment they tried to come upon the identity of this person. They could picture the vicious battle between Fai and Yami, the flames that scorched the original great tree, Yggdrasil, and the destruction of the courtyard, but no trace of a hero remained. They struggled to find something, trusting that their queen would never lie to them, but every attempt ended in failure. Not only did he free us from what we saw as the inevitable cycle of our lives, he also fought to protect everyone in the universe, those living and those long since departed, and yet no one even remembers his name. She paused, trying to push his name through her gritted teeth as tears welled in her eyes again. As she pulled herself together and continued, her words gathered strength and force, building in relief as her burden was lifted. Before he came to us, death was a mystery. It seems odd to think of it like that now, I know, and perhaps some of you don't even think about that time of not knowing anymore. We had our suspicions of what happened after we died back then, but we didn't know. After all, how could we? It's impossible. The dead don't come back to life. They leave this world never to return, and while it hurts to see them go, we know that that is the way of life. But he came to us. He lived in the afterlife, in Helheim. He was born there, and then he came to us. After his time in Ryoshima, he took a few of us on a journey. He showed us Helheim. Then he was gone, and everyone forgot him. It wasn't anybody's fault. That you forgot about him, I mean. Something just happened, and the memory of him was gone from everyone except me, and I have lived with that ever since. There was a stunned silence. Nobody knew what to do, what to say. They all thought they remembered what had happened, and when they had learned about the existence of Helheim, but the fervour with which the Queen had spoke had them convinced that they had missed something. Those who had felt anger and frustration before began to blame themselves, as did the Queen's retinue, who were horrified that she had kept this secret locked away for so long. All eyes fell on Rosalina as she quickly wiped the tears from her eyes and spoke clearly and confidently to her people for the first time in what felt like forever. Hideki, That was his name, Hideki. The Queen looked again towards the sky as a smile graced her lips. He was the only one I've ever loved, and I'm pretty sure he felt the same towards me. He arrived in the dead of night, not long after the Dragon's Festival about 6 years ago, and in spite of how bizarre everything was, when I saw him, something just clicked. Mother always used to say that when you find your soulmate, it is like finding your missing half. You just fit together. That's what I felt when I met him. He was sweet and so kind. He was almost too kind, really. He truly cared about people and would do anything to make them happy. He was my knight in shining armour, but without the shining armour. The Queen grinned a little, and there were a few laughs from the crowd as the atmosphere warmed from cold solemnity to a nostalgic glow. This was the woman they remembered as a girl, the one they would protect with their lives. They all settled down on the ground to hear the rest of the Queen's tale, desperate to know about this Hideki and what they had apparently forgotten. I jest, of course, and I guess my love for him has raised him up in my eyes to be perfect, like the mythical heroes of old. Maybe he was. After all, he managed to achieve some amazing things, but in reality, he was probably just like any of us. He was merely human, but he saw the beauty in this world and wished to fight for it, no matter the cost. From the moment he arrived, we went through everything together, and after that fateful night 5 years ago, he took us on that journey to Helheim, where I lost him forever. She paused, forcing back the sob that was rising in her chest as the images of that day flashed in front of her eyes. It may take some time, but would you all be willing to listen to my story from beginning to end? Much to her surprise, a roar of affirmations followed. The warm smile returned, lighting up her face. Thank you all so much. I've told you the outline of what happened, so I suppose I should start at the beginning. The night Hideki came to Ryoshima. It was the night after the fight between Fi and Yami. Fi had won, and everyone in the palace was a little worse for wear from the celebrations, but we were happy and at peace. Then, out of nowhere, he arrived.